Okay, well, this is another in our series on the time I was in Vietnam in the Army, military. And what we're doing is we're talking about the time when I was running the intelligence section, S2 in Army lingo, for psychological operations in about a third of what was then South Vietnam. It was known as 2 Corps. It had 4 corps areas, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's handy. And so on. I was there in the TRANG. I took over the unit that I was with. I was in the field originally for a couple of months, a couple of 3 months with 101st in the 82nd Airborne, and then came in from the field on the 1st of December of 1967 when our unit in the TRANG, NHA, TRANG, was upgraded from a company to a battalion, and I became, as I say, the head of intelligence for that unit and for most of about a third of South Vietnam. By the way, Nha Trang is about an hour by air north of Saigon, popularly now known as Ho Chi Minh City, and about an hour. Well, it's actually I have to work on that, because Nha Trang was probably about an hour and a half north, because it was an hour from where I originally was, down on the coast of a town called Phan Thiet, and running a field team operations down there. By the time I'm in Nha Trang, I'm now a captain. I'm not a military guy. I'm not never going to stay in the military. Um, but in those days, rank came very, very quickly. So you were a second lieutenant for a little while, then a first lieutenant, and then you were a captain. And by the time I left, towards the in the spring of 1969, I was actually on the list to become a major. Can you imagine? And so on. So they were still beefing up during the time I was there. They were beefing up the number of American soldiers in Vietnam. And we finally hit 565,000, I think, in the latter part of 1968, early 69, and then they began scaling back. And actually, I was scheduled to stay another month or 6 weeks longer, and they tapped on my shoulder and said, "How would you feel about going home now?" And by that time, I was down in Saigon, and I kind of had finished up getting the project I was working on, which was a cultural magazine. I'd gotten it up to the 135,000 monthly, and it was time to hand it off and not just sort of continue to go on. So I left the Army in the spring of 1969. But I was in Nha Trang. That's what we're going to talk about. From December 1st of 1967 until I went down to Saigon, probably in June or July of 1968, about the time I could have gone home, but they enticed me to stay and do this embassy project, which was to create, pretty much from the ground up, a cultural magazine for the 135,000 Vietnamese employees of the U.S. government. We'll get into that story later on when we talk about Saigon. But here we are in the Trang, and then one day this fellow shows up to become our executive officer in our unit. He kind of strolls into my S2 section, which is a secure area, and pulls up a chair, and I get a look at this guy. And this guy is, as I recall, a major himself, but he's not like any major I've seen. This guy is in his 40s, probably, and this guy is not. He just doesn't look like the kind of guy who would show up at a psychological operations unit. And how right I was. This was an old Vietnam hand, and he'd been out since the Paris Accords took place, and the French left in 1954. 1954, the French lost a big battle at Dien Bien Phu, which is in the northwest of what is today Vietnam. And they had to kind of throw up their hands, and the United States said, okay, we'll take it from here, and began sending in advisors to kind of keep the independent folks who wanted to be independent around. 1954 divided Vietnam into the North and South. The North became the communists under Ho Chi Minh, and the South became a mess over time, and eventually, of course, there. But anyway, this fellow had showed up because basically he wanted to look around this part of central on the central coast, and he was appraising things. He said, what's going on out here? And later on, I got wind of, I never got confirmation of this, but I'm pretty sure now it's satisfied that in the latter part of 1967, the United States and Lyndon Johnson, our president, was looking for a way to get out of Vietnam. It wasn't going really all that great. And so they cooked up this idea that on Christmas Day, they would, they'd all fly up to, with the press, up to Da Nang or Hue or somewhere up there. And they'd all climb into Jeeps and trucks, and they would drive all the way down Highway 1, I think it was 1, along the coast, which came through the TRANG, came through Fontaine, and on down, and they would go down to Saigon, and they'd climb out of their vehicles and say, look, look how peaceful it is. We've just driven down the entire length of the coast of Vietnam, and it's time for us to go home. So this would explain why the fellow who we're talking about one day had come into my office and sat down and said to me, oh, let's take a ride. I said, well, where are we going? Yeah, I want to drive down to Cam Ranh Bay. It's 20, 25 miles down there. Cam Ranh will always remain as one of the great natural harbors in the world. And at Cam Ranh Bay, we had built a large installation. The only stoplight in South Vietnam, it was said, was at Cam Ranh Bay. When you got onto, it was an island, and they built this large airstrip, which is today the airstrip for that portion of Vietnam. The Trang airstrip, which French built, which is too short, is I'm sure long. I know it's closed. It's probably been redeveloped by now. So anyway, I just want to ride down to. Let's ride down to Cam Ranh Bay. You be my driver. I want somebody with me here, and I want to talk to you. I said, all right, let's talk. So we climb in, and I'm driving along, and he says, why don't you stop here? So I stop, and he said, now I'm gonna go into the to the woods and to the here, and I'm gonna go down about a mile or so. So drive down about a mile or so, and just wait for me down there, and I'll be along in a little while. So I drive down. Here he comes, and he climbs in. I said, this guy, what's going on? He said, well, I'm just kind of checking out to see whether there's anybody out here and whether anybody been out here recently. What did you find? He said, no, it's been months, if not years, since any of the bad guys were in this stretch. Let's go. So we went down, and I think we stopped another time or two. Same thing. And we get down to Cam Ranh Bay, and I don't know, we stop, we have a Coke, a drink, whatever, hang out the Aussie Club for a little while, and then now driving back. And now, he had just checked out that entire length of the highway. And this is just before Christmas in 1967. And when I had been called in from the field, I think the 101st came into the area of operation where I'd been. They ended the operation in the Fontaine, where I'd been for some months, from August and December. and had started a new operation. So it was no longer Operation Byrd, B-Y-R-D. I think it was Klamath Falls, but it doesn't really matter because their mission was they're going out on this highway. I think it's Highway 1. I should have checked it. But anyway, and they're busy, busy, busy. Uh, going to get busy out there in operations looking at the highway. Well, it sure sounds to me like that rumor that I had where they all wanted to fly up to uh, Da Nang or where and drive down to Saigon on Christmas Day and have turkey was accurate, and I think this major probably fit into it as well. We lived in a unit in a villa, this large villa in the middle of the street. It was a really nice home. It was when my quarters were in the TRANG. And after, well, my sister, let's tell this story. My sister had sent us a Christmas tree and some other things. And we took the Christmas tree, we put the little Christmas tree, we put it up, in the front window, and it was, and it was there. And then one night somebody shot out the Christmas tree from, you say, oh, well, okay. These guys don't sound like they do not seem like they have the Christmas spirit. So I have to tell you, I don't really remember the night that they blew our Christmas tree away. And this story comes from a good friend of mine who remains very much in my life and in my wife's life. He comes up and sees us regularly. He's down in Fort Lauderdale now, and and he tells the story about the night that the Christmas tree got 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 blown away. We were running well, let's tell about this, Lieutenant. We had we were when we were in the field. We had I think we had 8 field teams of 3 men each. Each had a lieutenant, and then one sergeant, and then one enlisted guy who was an E4. And those were our PSYOP teams, and they were attached to different units. So when I was down in Pontiac, I was attached to the 2nd of the 7th, 1st Air Mobile Cav, and that's kind of where we were. And it is in your interest to get along with whoever you're attached to. They are feeding you, they are housing you, they are protecting you, and you sure as hell want them to know where you're going today and what you're doing. Because they're busy, but they can also keep an eye on you. Now, the reality was everything was kind of peaceful down in Binh Phuong province, down in Phan Thiet when I was there. It didn't stay that way for long after I left. It was peaceful, but and we got along satisfactorily. In fact, we got along so well with that unit down there. They actually built a building and gave me an office. I had an actual office. I'm in the field, for heaven's sakes. We're living on sand. I'm living in a tent with sand with ammo boxes stacked up high enough so I could sleep lower than on a cot. But I had this very nice office that they had built. So I was getting along with them. Well, this lieutenant I'm going to tell you about didn't. But he had a gift, and it was a God given gift, that he didn't really have to do much to make people really dislike him. Okay? He was from the Bronx, he was New York, he had this edge on him. And I love this guy. I really did. I mean, this is I've always been interested in true characters, and this guy was straight out of Central Cal. He's everything you wanted from a edgy lieutenant out of the Bronx. Just throw him in the movie immediately. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to give him any instructions. So anyway, he's up with the 173rd, which is up in the north. Actually, I think it was at Toowoomba. And he's not getting along with them too well. And I don't recall going up and meeting him, but I do recall the story I'm going to tell you. And it is that when somebody went up to visit with him, they had trouble finding him because he was living under a deuce-and-a-half truck. It was a large truck. Okay. This unit up there, I can't quite remember who they were. I knew it was on 173rd, I guess. They had become let's say, at odds with one another. So they had moved him out of his hooch, and he didn't have anywhere to stay, and it was rainy season. So now he's living under a truck, a Deuceman truck. And this is not the most healthy place to be. I mean, it's colder than you would think in Vietnam. And particularly during the winter and the rainy season. When it's a rainy season, it is the rainy season. I mean, it just keeps coming, you know. So anyway, soon enough, our guy comes down with malaria. I think it was. It had to be malaria, um, which is odd because we took two kinds of malaria pills. Monday, oh, quote, it had signs everywhere. Monday is malaria pill day. And these big round things, horrible orange things. You eat these and whatever. They had little tiny white things too, and so forth. So no reason to get malaria. I mean, I guess you could, but if but probably they stopped giving this guy malaria pills on Monday malaria pill. So soon enough, he's not doing well. He's got a high temperature. He's sick as a goat. And the way they treat you for this stuff is when you get your temperature too high, they put you in a bucket of ice. Okay, so you're sitting here now in the rainy season, in a bucket of ice with usually two or three other guys. And this is when whoever went up to see him came up to see him. This is where they found him sitting with several other. He's a lieutenant, but he was sitting with a couple of enlisted guys, and they're all sitting in the ice bucket, freezing, trying to get their temperature to break. And they really must have hated this guy because as he's sitting here after a day or two or however long they left him in there, a priest shows up. Now, this kid out of New York, he's Catholic, and the priest shows up and he says, "Is there a Lieutenant such and such here?" And he raises his hand and he said, "Lieutenant, I'm here to give you the last rites." And so they also were taking his temperature, and one of the medics came around and said to him, "Your temperature is 105.8, and if it goes up 2 more degrees, your brain's going to fry and you're going to have going to conniptions and so forth and so on." All right, well, he survived all that, and as he was getting ready to go home, we would normally pull our guys out of the field a month or 6 weeks before, and so here he comes down to our unit in the Trang, and nobody really wanted this guy around. I mean, it's just wherever. So one day, um, the personnel guy comes into my office and says, "Will you take him off your hands? Why don't we put him in your unit, just in your section? Make him kind of deputy S2." And I said, "Well, that's fine." And so he came, and of course I liked the guy, and he said, "All right, what do you want me to do?" And I said, "I want you to leave, go out in the Trang, check in with me about once every few days, and go do whatever you want to do." And soon enough, he was gone. And towards the end of the time I was there, um, the major who'd been running that unit up um, in the battalion up in the Trang, where I was the S2, went home, and a new lieutenant, actually a lieutenant colonel, showed up. And it's almost universal. When you take over from somebody who's been there and been running things, pretty much oftentimes the first thing you say is, or leave the feeling is, that the last guys were stupid, didn't know what they're doing, but I'm here and I'm going to straighten things out. And then they go about changing this and that and that and this, and geez, whatever. Instead of taking a deep breath and saying, what's working here and what do you guys think and so forth. So anyway, in comes this new lieutenant colonel. By this time, I'm about ready to leave because I'm going to go. I think I'm going to go to Europe for a month, and when I come back, I'm going to take over down in Saigon, and this Nessie project, this beginning project, to have an idea for this cultural magazine, and I'm the guy who's going to hire the 10 Vietnamese and do all that kind of nonsense. And so and he comes, and this guy's like eating turf builder for breakfast. I mean, he could have been, he could have been a West Point guy. I don't think he was. But I'd been given this ugly rubber um, kind of hawk-like thing, and I had hung it. We had a fan in our office, and I'd hung it there, and the thing had been named by others Super Hawk. Okay, and Super Hawk circulated around and around and around under the fan, and this guy walks in, and he's standing there really, and bam, Super hits him in the face, the side of his face. And what the hell's that? Well, that'd be Super Hawk. He said, "Get it out of here!" And I mean, "Get it out of here!" Blah 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 blah. I am not going to get along with this guy, but on the other hand, I probably don't need to for more than I don't know, a few more hours and a few more days or whatever. But that's kind of what would happen there. But we're looking at our notes here. Yeah. I'll tell the story about our weaponry and this is post Tet, and Tet happened in January, latter part of January, early February 1968, and this is where the bad guys, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, who were their army in South Vietnam, managed to attack us all across the country in our urban centers. Took pretty well got into the embassy, even down in Saigon. Anyway, they took the rail yard about a block from where we were, and we really wound up mixing it up. And again, I'll tell what I remember of that, which is pretty limited of what I know. What I know of what happened at Tet is what I wrote down at the time. I do not have a memory of much of that. But after that, we got new weapons. Okay? We had the AR-15s and the AR and the 16s. And the 16s were almost a plastic, kind of a sports car kind of a rifle. And we had the older M15s as well. But we also got a grease gun. And a grease gun fires automatically 45 caliber bullets. This thing is unbelievably fearsome. You can't hit anything with it because you would have to and pull the trigger. You have to push down on it, and go up, and it's crazy. But I have to say, of all the weapons, I carried a 45 later on when I was flying, and I would carry a 45 sometimes when I was walking in Saigon much later on. Never loaded. I always kept the bullets over here and the gun over here. I'm not into shooting, and I'm not into killing people. But out of the weaponry which I had a 15, I had a 16, I had a 45 at different times, never all together, and I had a grease gun. And out of them all, the grease gun is the most ridiculous weapon I ever had, and probably most endeared to. We have a fair amount of stuff that we did in that unit. It was kind of crazy. We gave out some psychological operation stuff. We ran a radio station up in Pleiku, got blown up 3 times. We had radios that we gave out that you could listen to that radio station on. We made up soap, and as you did the soap, used the soap, a different message would appear. It's crazy. And we did millions, and not tens of millions, of leaflets. We basically littered South Vietnam. And again, one of my favorite were the kites. We made up these kites which had a message on it. Supposedly, little kids could fly their kites and have these messages on it and so forth. All right, that's enough of the TRANG for today, and we're probably down to one more, and that's to talk about Tet in January 1968, which is in my life, there's before Tet and there's after Tet. I was not the same guy after Tet. I should not have survived. Obviously, I did. But this is where I'll tell you what I remember of it. And I guess I laugh about it, but it was really upsetting. It really was.